People say the battlefield is brutal, but sometimes the dinner table can be far worse. I survived Iraq. I lived through nights lit by mortar fire, through patrols where one wrong step could have meant my last. Yet nothing cut as deep as hearing my own brother laugh across the table and call me a failure, a nameless soldier no one would ever remember. He had no idea that in that very moment I was holding a truth that could change everything. A truth I had carried silently for years, hidden beneath medals no one in my family had ever seen. Before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if stories of courage, resilience, and hidden strength speak to you. And please share in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is in your corner of the world. It always moves me to see how far these stories travel and whose hearts they reach. Every story told here is a tribute, not only to the battles fought overseas, but also to the quiet wars we carry home in our hearts. At my mother's 70th birthday, I chose silence. The truth about my life was not something I could simply unwrap like a gift on the table. For more than 10 years, I had sworn an oath to keep my missions unspoken, to let my service live in the shadows. But silence can be sharper than any blade. That night, silence became my armor and later my greatest weapon. When the truth finally surfaced, it was not just my brother who was forced to see me differently. Every single person at that table realized I had never been the failure he claimed. I have always lived with shadows. Some were the kind that stretched across desert sand when the sun fell low, long and heavy, making every abandoned building look like it was hiding danger. Others followed me home, shadows that clung to my skin even in the safety of a quiet American street. They are not the kind of shadows you can chase away with light. They are the kind you carry, invisible but unshakable. When I retired from the army, I thought the silence would be my salvation. After years of noise and orders and explosions that rattled the bones, I dreamed of mornings that began with nothing more dangerous than the sound of coffee dripping. I imagined evenings where the only lights were soft and steady, not flares breaking the night sky. I thought stillness would heal me. What I did not know was that silence could cut just as deep as gunfire. I had served 20 years, Iraq twice, Afghanistan 3 times. I had worn the rank of major by the end. Carried men and women under my command through nights that smelled of smoke and iron. I had written letters home to mothers who would never see their sons again, folded flags and placed them into hands that trembled. My service had been the core of my life, the spine that held me upright. Yet most of it, the missions that mattered most, lived locked in files stamped classified. When I came home empty-handed. No photographs, no trophies, only memories I could not share. That is why, in the eyes of my family, I became the sister who never quite made it. I live in a small town in Virginia now. The house is modest, a 2-bedroom tucked against a stand of oak trees where the morning light filters in soft and golden. My days are spent as a consultant for the Department of Veterans Affairs. The work is quiet, invisible, but it matters. I help design programs for soldiers who come back with scars no one else can see. I meet men who can no longer sleep, women who flinch when a car backfires. I help them find steps forward, though I still stumble myself. Outside that circle, though, my life looks ordinary, too ordinary. No husband, no children, no career anyone in my family can brag about over cocktails. To them, I am the sister who came back and never did much else. They do not know the years I lost or the things I cannot say. Mark, my older brother, never fails to remind me of it. Mark is the kind of man who fills every room he walks into. He runs a successful construction company in Richmond, drives a car that costs more than my entire house, and wears suits cut sharp enough to slice. At family gatherings, he holds court, telling stories about business deals and golf games with mayors and state senators. People laugh at his jokes, nod at his advice, sip the wine he insists on bringing. He thrives on admiration. And when the attention drifts even slightly toward me, he cannot resist pulling it back. A comment here about how I should have gone into business. A chuckle there about how retirement must be nice when you never worked a real job. He says it with a smile, the kind that makes it sound like a tease, but I feel the sting every time. Mother does not stop him. She smiles too, her eyes darting away, embarrassed perhaps, but never correcting him. In her world, accomplishments are measured in family photos and grandchildren. She understands Mark. She does not understand me. It has been this way for years. At Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, every table becomes a battlefield I never chose. I sit quietly, sipping water, pushing food around my plate, reminding myself that silence is easier than explaining. How can I tell them about convoys in Kandahar when they complain about traffic on the interstate? How can I explain the weight of a folded flag to people who argue over who should host Easter brunch? Some truths do not translate, so I let Mark talk, let my mother nod, and I absorb the little cuts. But wounds, even small ones, add up. The memory of my brother's words at that birthday dinner still presses against my ribs. Failure, he had called me, a soldier no one remembered. He had no idea that the man who once stood beside me in Afghanistan now sits as a senator on Capitol Hill. He had no idea that the missions I led saved lives he will never hear about. He had no idea because I never told him. And that was my choice. Still, choice does not make it easier. I sometimes wonder if my silence was cowardice rather than humility. Was I protecting classified information, or was I protecting myself from their blank stares, their disbelief, their inability to grasp the shape of my life? Explaining would mean opening wounds. And I have always been better at hiding them. There are nights when the past creeps back, when I wake with the smell of burning sand in my nose and the echo of distant gunfire in my ears. I sit on the edge of the bed, my hands pressed together, whispering the names of people I could not save. Then I stand, splash water on my face, and remind myself I am home. That is what matters, home. Yet in my own family, I sometimes feel like a guest. Mark once told me I wasted my life. He said I could have built a business, raised children, left a legacy. He said service does not count unless people can see it. That is how he thinks, in things you can touch. Things you can display. I did not argue, I never do. But there is a truth I hold close, one that keeps me steady, a truth my brother will never understand. Service is not about being seen. It is about standing in the dark so others can live in the light. That truth, hidden as it is the shadow behind every medal I was ever given. Most mornings I wake before the sun. Old habits die hard. I lace up my running shoes, even though my knees remind me I am no longer 30. The air in Virginia is heavy with dew, the streets still quiet except for the hum of sprinklers and the rustle of leaves. Running is the one thing that makes me feel whole again. Each step pounds out memories I cannot erase. Each breath steadies the pulse that sometimes still races for no reason at all. After the run, I brew coffee, strong and black, and sit on the porch as the sky lightens. This is the part of my life my family never sees, the calm, the rituals that keep me tethered. To them, I am a woman drifting, a sister who never quite figured things out. They do not see the discipline that still shapes my everyday, the order I cling to because without it the world tilts. The work I do for Veterans Affairs is not glamorous. I sit in an office, sometimes at home, sometimes in Arlington, poring over proposals and budgets, designing programs to ease the transition for soldiers who are more like me than my family will ever know. I speak with men who wear long sleeves to cover scars, women who flinch at sudden noises. I listen more than I talk because sometimes what people need most is to be heard. My own silence has become my gift. But again, none of this is visible to Mark. To him, work is contracts signed, buildings erected. Profit earned, he sees my modest salary as proof I have failed. He once told me, half joking, that I should come work for him, managing accounts or organizing schedules, as if 20 years in combat had prepared me for nothing more than his paperwork. I smiled politely, declined, and let the comment slide. It was easier than letting him see how it cut. Mother calls often, her voice warm but laced with questions. Have you met anyone? Do you ever think about moving closer to family? Are you happy? She never asks about the war, never about the years I was gone. Perhaps she is afraid of the answers, or perhaps she simply cannot picture her daughter in desert fatigues, carrying a weapon heavier than she is. To her, I am still the girl who loved books, who sang in the church choir. That girl vanished long ago, but I do not correct her. It is easier this way. The invitation to Mother's 70th birthday came in the mail. Though she had already called to tell me Mark was handling the planning. A dinner at one of Richmond's finer restaurants, family gathered from across the state. I read the elegant script on the card and felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Family gatherings meant laughter, wine, and always the subtle digs aimed my way. I considered declining, inventing some excuse about work, but duty pulled me in. A A soldier does not abandon her post, even when the battlefield is only a dining table. The week leading up to the dinner was filled with small reminders of the distance between my life and theirs. Mark called to confirm my attendance. His voice brisk, businesslike. He told me what to wear, a suit, nothing too casual. He told me who would be there, cousins I had not seen in years, colleagues of his who admired him. He did not ask if I was comfortable. He did not care. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, staring at the medals tucked away in a drawer. Bronze Star, Meritorious Service, Army Commendation. Each one carried a story. A night when decisions were made that meant the difference between life and death. Yet here I was, worrying about wearing the right shoes to impress a brother who had never set foot outside his comfort zone. The irony was bitter. Still, I pressed my uniform, not the dress blues, just a simple navy suit that made me feel steady. I ironed each crease with the same precision I once used to prepare gear before patrol. There is comfort in preparation, even for battles of words. The morning of the dinner, I ran farther than usual, trying to burn off the tension. My knees ached, but I pushed harder because pain I could control was better than the pain waiting at that table. When I returned home, sweat dripping, lungs burning, I felt a flicker of the strength that had carried me through worse. I would face my family the same way I had faced every mission, one step at a time. Driving into Richmond stirred old memories. The city had changed since I was a child, but some streets still held the echoes of our youth. Mark and I had ridden bikes down these blocks, argued over baseball cards, dreamed of futures that now seemed galaxies apart. He had always wanted to build, to create something solid. I had wanted to serve, to protect. Our paths diverged, but somewhere along the way he had decided his was the only path worth walking. When I arrived at the restaurant, I paused outside, watching through the glass as family gathered. Mark stood tall, gesturing grandly, laughter booming. Mother sat beside him, glowing, her silver hair catching the light. I saw cousins hugging, children darting between tables. For a moment I felt like an outsider, a soldier returning to a world that had moved on without her. I straightened my shoulders, took a breath, and stepped inside. Mark greeted me with a firm handshake, not a hug. His eyes scanned my suit, approving but detached. He introduced me to colleagues as his sister Grace, retired military, before quickly pivoting to talk of his latest project. I smiled, nodded. Played my part. The soldier in me knew how to blend into any environment, to adapt, to endure. As the evening unfolded, I sat quietly, listening to stories of business deals, vacations, new homes. I chimed in when asked, offered small details about my work, but the questions never lingered. Mark filled the silences with tales of his success, and I let him. Silence, after all, was familiar, but under the surface, tension coiled. I felt it in the way Mark's eyes flicked toward me, measuring, dismissing. I felt it in the way Mother glanced between us, torn between pride in her son and concern for her daughter. I felt it in the weight of my own restraint, the effort it took not to speak truths that would shatter their neat perceptions. At one point, a cousin asked if I ever missed the army. I hesitated, then said softly that parts of it would always be with me. Mark laughed, loud enough for the table to hear. He joked that of course I missed it, since I never found anything else to do. The laughter that followed was polite, uncomfortable, but it cut all the same. I sipped my water, my hand steady, my face calm. Inside, the shadows stirred. That night, driving home under a sky heavy with stars, I replayed the evening in my mind. The laughter, the comments, the quiet ache that followed. I thought of the soldiers I had counseled earlier that week. Men and women struggling to find their place after service. I realized I was no different. My battlefield had simply shifted. The birthday dinner loomed ahead, larger now, a gathering that would pull all these threads tight. I did not know then what would unfold, how truth would rise like a tide no one could stop. But I felt it deep in my bones. Something was coming, and I was ready. The night of my mother's 70th birthday began like so many other family gatherings. A restaurant polished to a sheen, white tablecloths pressed crisp, the clink of glasses and the low murmur of conversations blending into a hum that felt almost ceremonial. Mark had chosen the place, of course. He always did. It was upscale enough to impress, with tall windows looking out over the James River and waiters who moved as if they floated. I arrived alone, as usual. I carried a small wrapped gift for my mother, something simple, a silver-framed photograph of us from long ago, before the years had weathered us both. Walking inside, I smoothed the fabric of my navy suit, steadying myself the way I used to steady a rifle before a mission. The battlefield had changed, but the need for composure had not. Mark spotted me almost immediately. He cut through the room with that commanding presence of his, hand raised high, calling my name so everyone turned. His smile was wide, his handshake firm, but his eyes carried the same gleam I knew too well, the one that said he was already planning his next line at my expense. "You made it," he said, his voice booming just enough to carry. "Wasn't sure the busy life of retirement would leave you any free time." The table laughed politely. I smiled, offered a soft hello, and let it pass. Silence had always been my shield. Mother hugged me tightly, her eyes misting. For a moment, warmth flooded through me. Whatever else stood between us, she loved me. That truth steadied me more than I realized. The evening unfolded in layers. Relatives I hadn't seen in years pulled me into small talk about weather and traffic, about their children heading to college, about jobs and mortgages. Each question about me was brief, perfunctory. What was I doing these days? Still in that consulting thing, living alone still. Their attention drifted quickly back to safer ground, to Mark's booming stories about business ventures and golf tournaments. Dinner was served, courses arriving one after another with practiced grace. Mark filled the pauses with stories of contracts landed, employees hired, buildings rising tall because of his vision. His colleagues at the table laughed heartily, nodding, raising their glasses in admiration. Then came the first jab, sharp as a bayonet slipped between ribs. "You know," Mark said, leaning back in his chair, his glass of wine catching the light, "Grace here is the only person I know who managed to retire before 50 without ever running a business or raising a family. Quite the accomplishment, living proof that the system takes care of everyone." The table chuckled again, some out of politeness, some out of genuine amusement, none of them realizing how those words landed. My mother's eyes flicked toward me, worry flickering across her face, but she stayed silent. She always did. I felt the air press heavy against my chest. I could have spoken. I could have told them about the men I had led through streets littered with debris, about the night I dragged a wounded soldier to safety while bullets tore the air. I could have described the weight of a folded flag placed into a grieving widow's hands, but those truths were not meant for dining tables or polite company. They belonged to deserts and battlefields and the quiet spaces in my own heart. So I smiled faintly, took a sip of water, and let silence speak for me. Mark saw the silence as surrender. He mistook my calm for weakness. He leaned in further, emboldened, weaving tales that always ended with him as the victor, the hero of his own narrative. I had heard it all before. What I had not expected was how raw it felt this time. On this night meant to honor the woman who had given us both life. Across the table, a man sat quietly watching. I noticed him only because he did not join in the laughter. He was older, silver hair cropped short, his suit tailored but simple. His eyes were sharp, assessing, the kind that missed nothing. My mother had introduced him briefly as a friend she knew through church, but something about the way he carried himself sparked recognition deep inside me. The straight spine, the measured movements, the gaze that carried the weight of command. It took me a moment, but then I knew. General Thomas Rivera. He had been one of my commanding officers years ago, a man I had served under in Afghanistan. His presence here at my mother's birthday was unexpected, almost surreal. He had aged, but the authority was still there, etched into the lines of his face. Our eyes met across the table. He gave the faintest nod, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but I felt it like a lifeline. He knew, he remembered, and in that moment I was not invisible. Still, he said nothing. He simply observed, his expression unreadable, as Mark continued his performance. I wondered if my mother knew who he truly was. Perhaps to her he was simply an acquaintance from the community, someone she had invited out of kindness. Perhaps she had no idea he once commanded entire divisions, that he carried stories even heavier than mine. The dinner moved forward. Laughter rose and fell, glasses clinked, dessert was served. Mark raised a toast to Mother, grand and eloquent, speaking of family and legacy, of sacrifices made so that he could succeed. His words brought tears to her eyes, applause to the table. He thrived in that spotlight, basked in it. When the applause faded, he turned his gaze back to me. And of course, we should thank Grace too, for reminding us all that sometimes the easiest path is the one where you let others do the heavy lifting. The table laughed again, softer this time, but still enough. I felt my pulse quicken. But I held steady, silence, always silence. It was the only way I knew to endure without breaking. General Rivera's eyes stayed fixed on me. He did not intervene, not yet. He was measuring, waiting. Perhaps he wanted to see how much I would bear. Perhaps he knew that timing mattered, that truth revealed too soon loses its weight. As the evening wound down, people drifted into smaller conversations, sipping coffee, nibbling at cake. I sat back, breathing slowly. My gaze on the candles flickering atop the dessert plate in front of Mother. 70 years of life, of love, of raising children who had walked such different paths. She deserved celebration, not this undercurrent of rivalry. When the night ended, hugs were exchanged, promises to visit made. Mark clasped my shoulder, his smile smug. "Good seeing you, sis. Try not to work too hard at all that, whatever it is you do." I smiled again, the same faint curve of lips, the same unshaken silence. He walked away certain he had won. But across the room, General Rivera caught my eye once more. His expression had changed. There was something in it now, something resolute, a promise unspoken. I left the restaurant with the cool night air wrapping around me, the city lights shimmering across the river. My footsteps echoed against the pavement, steady, measured. I thought of the battles I had fought, the losses I had carried, the strength it took to stay silent. Yet that night, for the first time in years, I felt a shift. Something had changed. The truth had a way of rising, no matter how long it stayed buried, and I knew General Rivera would not stay silent forever. I drove home that night with my hands steady on the wheel and my mind restless. The city lights fell behind me, replaced by the dark stretch of highway that cut through the fields. Every mile carried me farther from the restaurant, but the words lingered, sharp as shrapnel. Retired before 50, living proof that the system takes care of everyone. Mark's voice played over and over in my head, the smugness of it, the laughter it coaxed from others. I told myself I had weathered worse. I had stood in deserts with sandstorms ripping skin from bone. I had faced men with rifles leveled at my chest, but there was something about the sting of family scorn that pierced deeper than any bullet. Perhaps it was because in war the enemy is clear. At home, the battlefield is murkier. General Rivera's face stayed with me too, the calm authority in his eyes, the way he had watched without speaking. I tried to imagine what he was thinking as Mark strutted and preened. As I sat in silence, he had once told me back in Afghanistan that patience was the sharpest weapon a leader could carry. I wondered if that was why he had stayed quiet, holding back until the moment mattered most. 2 days later, I found myself replaying the dinner when the phone rang. It was Mother. Her voice held the soft exhaustion of someone who had smiled for too long. "Grace, thank you for coming," she said. "It meant a lot to me. Everyone kept saying how nice it was to see you." I smiled faintly, though she could not see it. "I'm glad I was there, Mom. You deserve to be celebrated." She hesitated, then added, "Mark means well. You know how he is. He likes to make jokes." Jokes, that was the word she used to soften the edges. I let it slide. Correcting her would change nothing. Later that week, I stopped by the VA office in Arlington. The halls were familiar. The faces weary but resilient. I sat with a young man named Daniel, barely 25, who had lost a leg in Kandahar. He spoke about feeling useless, about family members who treated him like a burden. I listened, nodding, offering quiet encouragement. His words hit home harder than he knew. We were two sides of the same coin, carrying scars that the world misread. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "Sometimes I think silence is the only way to survive." I nodded again, my throat tight. "Silence can protect you," I said softly, "but it can also weigh you down. The trick is knowing when to let it go." Those words lingered with me long after I left. A week passed before I saw General Rivera again. I had not expected it. I was leaving a meeting at the Pentagon, walking briskly through the marble corridors when his voice called my name. "Major Miller." I turned, surprised at how quickly I fell back into the reflex of saluting him, though technically he owed me no command now. He waved off the gesture with a faint smile. "Grace," he said, "it has been a long time." We stood in the hallway, a swirl of uniforms and suits passing us by. His presence was steady, grounding, as it had always been. "I didn't expect to see you at my mother's birthday," I admitted. "She speaks often at church events," he replied. "I have found comfort there since retirement. When she invited me, I thought it was simply a social evening. I did not realize I would be walking into a family war zone." Heat crept into my cheeks. "You saw all of that?" "I did." His eyes softened. "And I saw you hold your ground. You said nothing, but sometimes silence speaks louder than any defense." I searched his face, trying to read what lay behind the words. "Why didn't you say anything?" He paused, considering. "Because it was not the right time. The truth is powerful, but only when people are ready to hear it. Your brother was not ready. Your family was not ready. When the moment comes, though, it will matter more than you can imagine." His words sent a chill through me. "You think that moment is coming? I know it is." We parted soon after, but his certainty stayed with me. For the first time, I felt the stirrings of change, like the faint rumble of thunder before a storm. Back at home, the days fell into routine again. Running, coffee, work. Yet everything felt sharper now, as if the birthday dinner had cracked something open. Mark called occasionally, his voice carrying the same mix of pride and superiority. He spoke of new deals, new ventures, new houses. He never asked about me, not really. I answered politely, offered little, hung up quickly. Mother visited one afternoon, bringing leftovers wrapped in foil, fussing over me like I was still a child. We sat in my kitchen, sunlight spilling through the window, the air heavy with unspoken things. At one point she said quietly, "Your brother loves you, you know. He just shows it in complicated ways." I did not reply. Some battles were not worth fighting. But at night, alone in the quiet, I thought of the candles on Mother's birthday cake, the way Mark's words had cut through the air, the way Rivera's gaze had held steady. I thought of all the years I had carried silence like armor, wondering if it had protected me or trapped me. The truth lived in shadows, waiting, and shadows, I knew, did not stay hidden forever. Sleep never came easy. It had been that way since the desert, since the nights where the horizon burned with orange fire and the ground shook under the roar of mortars. I would lie in my bed now, decades later, the hum of my refrigerator in the background, the silence of a safe neighborhood pressing in. But in the dark, the memories had a way of clawing back. That week after Mother's birthday, I woke in the middle of the night, sweat cooling on my skin. The room was quiet, but my heart raced as if I had just sprinted through alleys lined with shadows. I sat up, bracing my hands on my knees, and for a long moment I was no longer in Virginia. I was back in Iraq. It was Mosul, 2007. The city was fractured, divided by fear and violence. Intelligence had come in about an American journalist being held in a safe house on the outskirts. My team was tasked with extraction. 11 of us went in, not all came out. I was a captain then, leading a group of young soldiers whose eyes still carried hope, though war was grinding it down fast. I remember their faces clearly. Private Daniels, barely 20, from Iowa, who always carried candy in his pocket for local kids. Sergeant Walker, steady and sharp, who had a wife expecting back home. And Corporal Hernandez, who never stopped humming country songs under his breath, even in the middle of firefights. That night, the air was thick with dust. We moved through narrow streets, shadows stretching long under a sliver of moonlight. Every corner could hide a rifle, every rooftop could mask an enemy. My radio crackled with clipped orders, the kind that left no room for hesitation. We breached the house just after midnight. Gunfire erupted instantly, a thunderous storm in confined space. I can still hear the shouts, the screams, the deafening echo of rounds slamming into walls. We pushed forward, room by room, clearing each with precision drilled into us over endless months of training. I found the journalist in the back room, bound, eyes wide with terror. For a second, he didn't believe we were real. He thought we were another nightmare come to claim him. I cut his ties, told him in the firmest voice I could muster that he was safe. But safety was never guaranteed. As we moved out, an explosion tore through the night. The ground lifted, heat and fire consuming the air. I remember being thrown back, the weight of debris pressing down. My ears rang with silence so total it felt like the world had ended. When I pushed myself up, dazed and bleeding, I saw Daniels lying still, his candy scattered like lost treasure across the dirt. Walker was shouting, pulling Hernandez, who was hit but still breathing. Chaos swallowed us, but training drove us forward. We got the journalist out, we got most of our team out, but the cost carved itself into me. That mission was classified. The journalist went home, his story never mentioning the blood spilled to free him. My soldiers' names were etched on plaques, folded flags sent to families with scripted words of honor. My name was never spoken. I carried the memory in silence because speaking of it would have violated oaths I swore. That silence became my life. It is why my family never knew, why Mark thought I had retired into nothingness. To him, absence of glory meant absence of worth. He never saw that true worth sometimes lives in the shadows. The weight of it all pressed harder in the years that followed. PTSD, they called it. I called it ghosts. Faces of the fallen visiting in quiet hours, sounds that didn't belong in peacetime creeping into the edges of my mind. I learned to manage it, to breathe through it, to live around it, but it never fully left. In the weeks after Mother's birthday, the ghosts came more often. Perhaps Mark's words had shaken something loose, a reminder that while I could stay silent with my family, I could not silence the past. Every jab he made dug deeper into wounds I had never shown him. He called me again one evening. I almost didn't answer, but habit won. "Grace," he said cheerfully, "I ran into some old friends from school, told them about you. You know what they said? They couldn't believe you've done so little with your life." I stayed quiet, gripping the phone tighter. He laughed lightly. "Don't take it personally. You've always been better at keeping things simple. Some people are lighters, some are supporters. Nothing wrong with that. Supporters, that was the word he chose. It hung in the air like smoke, bitter and cloying. I ended the call quickly, my throat tight. That night I sat on my porch, the cool Virginia air brushing against me, stars scattered across the sky. I thought of Iraq, of Afghanistan, of the weight of silence. I thought of the journalist who went home to tell stories while my soldiers were buried quietly. I wondered if silence was noble or cowardly, and still I told no one. The ghosts of Iraq were not the only ones that visited me. Afghanistan had left its own scars. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear the rotors of helicopters even when the sky above Virginia was still. The whine of engines, the thump of blades cutting through the air. My chest would tighten as if I were back in the valley, mountains rising on all sides, dust whipping my face, danger cloaked in silence. It was 2010, Kunar Province. By then, I had been promoted to major, carrying not only responsibility, but also the weight of decisions that meant life or death. Intelligence briefings spoke of insurgents moving weapons through mountain passes, of ambushes set like traps waiting for the unwary. My team was tasked with disrupting the flow. We hiked for days, packs heavy, every step uncertain. The terrain was merciless, beauty and menace woven together. Villages clung to slopes like stubborn dreams. Children stared with wide eyes, their futures carved by forces far beyond their control. I remember their faces too. War always imprints itself on the innocent. One night we set up near a ridge. The stars were so sharp they looked like they could cut the sky. We heard movement below, shadows weaving through the valley. I gave the order to hold, to wait until we knew more. Patience, always patience. Then the gunfire erupted. The ambush was sudden, brutal. Bullets ricocheted off rocks, sparks flashing in the dark. My soldiers fired back, steady and trained, but the terrain favored the enemy. I crawled to the radio, calling for air support, my voice steady though fear pressed hard in my chest. Minutes stretched into eternities. When the helicopters arrived, their lights slicing through the dark, the ground shook with the force of salvation. But we had losses, always losses. Sergeant Jameson, who had just become a father, did not make it off that ridge. Corporal Lee carried wounds that would end his military career. And me, I carried the knowledge that leadership meant living with the names of those who never came home. That mission, too, was classified. The reports would never reach my family. To them, Afghanistan was just a word on the news, a war fought by strangers. They never knew how many times I lay awake wondering if a different decision might have saved another life. The past wove itself into my present like threads I could never untangle. Some nights, I found myself sitting in the dark, holding a coin one of my soldiers had given me for luck. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the grooves, hearing the echoes of his laughter. He never returned. I still had the coin. Survivors always do. Mark, of course, knew none of this. To him, I was a woman who had left the army early, who had failed to build a family or a fortune, who lived quietly in a small house with little to show. He called again one weekend, his tone light but edged with superiority. "You know, Grace," he said, "at Mom's dinner you looked like you were just floating. No real stories to share, nothing to show. People notice that, they talk." I swallowed hard, forcing calm. "Not everything worth living through can be told at a dinner table, Mark." He chuckled. "That's the thing. If it can't be told, maybe it's not worth much." His words struck like a hammer. I ended the call quickly before anger could slip through my voice. Later that night, I walked through my living room, past the cabinet where my medals lay hidden. Bronze Star, Army Commendation with Valor, ribbons that told stories without speaking. I had tucked them away years ago, unwilling to place them on walls where they would invite questions I could not answer. Sometimes I wondered if hiding them had been a mistake. The world measured worth by what could be displayed. Mark had his company, his cars, his photographs from vacations abroad. I had silence, folded flags. Memories of men and women who would never grow old. To most people, that looked like nothing. To me, it was everything. One morning, I ran into General Rivera again, this time at the VA. He had been speaking with staff about improving programs for veterans. When he saw me, he offered a firm handshake. His eyes were steady, filled with the same weight I carried. "How are you holding up, Grace?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "Some days are easier than others. Some nights less so." He nodded. "That never fully leaves us, but silence can be dangerous too. It isolates." I looked away, out the window where autumn leaves scattered in the breeze. "Silence has kept me safe." "Perhaps," he said softly, "but sometimes it also keeps others blind." His words lingered long after he left. Blind. Yes, my family was blind. Blind to the truth of what I had endured. Blind to the sacrifices I carried in my bones. And perhaps I had allowed it, wrapping myself in secrecy until even love could not see through it. The following Sunday, Mark organized a brunch. He liked to gather family when it suited him, especially when he had a new success to showcase. I attended, more for Mother than for him. The table was crowded, laughter flowing easily. Mark told stories of his latest deal, how he had landed a contract that would expand his business into new states. He spoke with the pride of a man who believed himself untouchable. Then with a smirk, he turned the spotlight on me again. "My sister here," he said, raising his glass. "She has the easiest life of all. No deadlines, no stress, just retirement checks rolling in. If only we could all be so lucky." A few people laughed, though uneasily this time. Perhaps they sensed the cruelty beneath the words. My jaw tightened, but I said nothing. Mother shifted in her seat, her eyes darting between us, but she too stayed quiet. Inside, though, something cracked. His taunts no longer felt like harmless jabs. They felt like erasure. Like he was burying every soldier I had led, every friend I had lost under the weight of his dismissive smile. I held my silence still, but it was no longer the silence of protection. It was the silence before a storm. That night, as I drove home, I thought of Afghanistan again. Of Jameson, of Lee, of all the names carved into stone. I thought of the coin in my hand, of the oaths I had sworn. And I realized that one day soon, silence would not be enough. The ghosts of the past were pushing me forward, and when the truth finally surfaced, it would not be a whisper, it would be a reckoning. The reckoning came on an evening that should have been ordinary. My mother wanted a Sunday dinner, nothing elaborate, just family gathered around her table. She said she missed the way it used to be when we were children, when the smell of roast chicken filled the house and conversations stretched late into the night. I went because she asked, because despite everything, I still wanted to give her peace. Mark arrived like a storm front, full of energy and stories. He brought a bottle of wine he announced cost more than most people's mortgage payments. He carried himself with the same swagger he had worn since high school, the same confidence that had grown unchecked with every dollar he earned. My nieces and nephews listened with wide eyes as he spoke about new business deals and expensive vacations. He basked in their admiration like a man warming himself by firelight. I sat quietly, passing plates, asking about school, listening more than speaking. Silence had always been my companion, but I felt the air thickening. Mark's gaze drifted toward me more often, his smirk curling as if he were preparing the next strike. It came just after dessert, when laughter was fading and the table leaned back in comfortable fullness. Mark lifted his glass, swirled the dark red wine, and turned to me. "You know, Grace," he said, his voice casual but sharp enough to cut. "Mom asked me the other day what you've done that we could all be proud of. I had to think hard. Truth is, I came up empty. Whole life gone by, and I can't recall a single moment where you did something worth raising a glass to." The table fell silent. Forks froze midair, eyes darted nervously between us. My mother's face paled, her hand tightening around her napkin. I felt my pulse hammer in my throat, every muscle tensing as if for battle. Words pressed against my lips, aching to be released. But before I could speak, a chair scraped back. General Rivera rose. The room shifted instantly. He was not a man who needed to raise his voice to command attention. His presence alone did it. The silver hair, the steady gaze, the authority honed over decades of command. Every eye turned to him, curiosity sparking, silence thickening. "I cannot sit here and listen to that," he said, his tone calm but unyielding. His eyes fixed on Mark, who blinked, startled. "You speak of pride as though you understand it, but you know nothing of the sacrifices your sister has made." Mark laughed nervously, lifting his glass. "General, with all respect, we're just having a little fun. Grace knows I don't mean anything by it." Rivera's expression did not change. "No, you mean every word, and it is time you understood the truth." He turned then, his gaze sweeping the table, his voice steady and deliberate. "Grace Miller served under my command in both Iraq and Afghanistan. She led men into combat, into places most of you cannot even imagine. She carried the weight of decisions that meant life or death, and she bore those burdens with honor. You sit here mocking her life while you profit from comfort and safety she helped provide." A ripple of shock moved through the room. My mother's eyes widened, her hand rising to her mouth. My nieces and nephews stared at me, their mouths parted, struggling to reconcile the quiet aunt they knew with the soldier being described. Rivera continued, his words precise as if each one carried the weight of testimony. "One mission in particular remains etched in my memory, classified at the time, but now partially declassified. Grace led a team that rescued more than a dozen Americans held hostage in Mosul. Among them was a sitting member of Congress. That man is alive today because of her, and yet she spoke of it to no one, not even her family, because secrecy was part of her duty." Gasps circled the table. Mark's face drained of color, his mouth opening but no sound emerging. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a stunned silence that clung to him like chains. I sat frozen, my hands trembling under the table. Hearing my past laid bare in front of my family felt like standing in bright light after years in shadows. I had never wanted recognition, never sought applause. Yet something in me broke open as I saw my mother's eyes fill with tears. Saw her reach for my hand as if afraid I might vanish. Rivera's voice softened, though it carried the same unshakable strength. "Do you know what true pride is? It is not loud or boastful. It does not need applause. True pride is living with integrity, doing what is right when no one is watching, and never demanding the world pay attention. That is what your sister embodies. Grace's silence is not weakness. It is humility. And humility is the highest honor a soldier can carry." The room was still. The only sound was the faint clink of a spoon slipping from someone's hand onto a plate. For the first time in my life, Mark could not speak. His eyes flicked toward me, but there was no smirk now, no laughter, only the heavy weight of realization pressing down on him. He had tried to strip me of dignity with words, and instead he had been stripped bare by silence that was no longer mine alone. I looked around the table, at faces shifting with understanding, at the tears gathering in my mother's eyes, at the awe on the faces of my nieces and nephews. My chest ached, not with pain, but with something deeper. Something like release. The truth had been spoken, not by me, but for me. And in that moment, I understood the power of silence in a way I never had before. The silence after Rivera's words stretched long, as if the whole room had forgotten how to breathe. My mother's hand clung to mine, trembling. Her eyes brimmed with tears, her lips parted but unable to form words. My nieces stared wide-eyed, mouths half open, trying to reconcile the woman they knew as their quiet aunt with the soldier their guest had just described. Mark sat stiff in his chair, the wineglass in his hand trembling slightly. His confident mask had cracked, and through it seeped something raw, something he had never shown, vulnerability. For once he had no clever retort, no polished line of dismissal. The general's words had stripped him of the stage he so often commanded. My brother opened his mouth finally, voice rougher than usual. "That can't be right. She never said anything, not once." Rivera turned his gaze on him, steady and sharp. "Because she wasn't allowed to, because her oath required silence. Because honor is not about self-advertisement. You mistake quiet for emptiness, but quiet can also mean depth too great for you to measure." The table shifted uneasily. My sister-in-law lowered her gaze, embarrassed. The children looked between us, sensing the fault lines but unable to name them. Mother let out a shaky breath, whispering, "Grace, why didn't you ever tell me?" I squeezed her hand gently. Because it wasn't mine to tell. My duty was to protect. Not to boast. That duty didn't end when I came home. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she nodded, her grip tightening. I am proud of you more than you'll ever know. Mark swallowed hard, his face pale. All these years, I thought you were just drifting. I thought you wasted your life. His words trailed off, heavy with shame. Rivera's voice cut through again, calm but resolute. No life dedicated to service is wasted. Let me tell you something else about your sister. After that mission in Mosul, she refused a commendation that would have placed her name in the spotlight. She asked that it be given quietly, without ceremony, so the focus remained on those who did not return. That kind of humility is rare, even in the military. It is what separates true leaders from those who crave recognition. The twist in his words struck deeper than the revelation itself. It was not just that I had done something worthy. It was that my refusal to speak of it, my silence that Mark had mocked for so long, was itself a form of honor. My nieces shifted forward in their chairs, eyes glowing. Aunt Grace, you're a hero, one of them whispered, awe dripping from her young voice. I shook my head softly. No, heroes are the ones who never came back. I just did my job. But even as I said it, I felt a warmth spread through me, not pride exactly, but release. For the first time in years, my silence did not feel like a prison. It felt like choice. Mark lowered his gaze to the table. His shoulders slumped, the bravado drained from him. He muttered something too soft to catch, then pushed back his chair and stood. I need some air, he said, and walked out, his steps uneven. The family remained in stunned quiet. Rivera sat back down, his posture relaxed, but his eyes still holding command. He looked around the table and said, I have led soldiers into fire, and I have buried too many. I can tell you this without hesitation. Grace Miller carried courage that few can comprehend. She lived through what would have broken most, and she never once demanded recognition. That humility, that quiet strength is what we should all aspire to. The weight of his words settled over everyone. My mother leaned against me, her tears soaking into my shoulder. My nieces and nephews reached across the table, small hands brushing mine. For years they had seen me as the quiet aunt, the one without stories. Now, in their eyes, I saw something shift. Respect, wonder, connection. I thought of all the times Mark had mocked me, all the nights I had gone home carrying his words like stones. For once, I didn't need to defend myself. The truth had spoken louder than I ever could. Later, as the evening wound down and family drifted away in hushed groups, Mother held me close. I'm sorry, she whispered. I should have defended you more. I should have seen you. I kissed her cheek gently. You loved me, that was enough. When only Rivera remained, he walked me to the door. The night air was cool, filled with the sound of crickets. He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm, grounding. You bore your silence well, he said, but sometimes the world needs to hear the truth, not for you but for them, so they learn that humility is not emptiness. It is the deepest strength of all. I met his gaze, my throat thick. Thank you for speaking when I couldn't. He nodded once. One day you may find your own voice. Until then, know that you are seen. As he walked away, I stood on the porch, the night sky stretching endless above me. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. The ghosts were still there, they always would be, but the weight of secrecy had eased. My family knew. Mark had been silenced, not by anger, not by argument, but by truth. And the truth was this: silence carried with integrity can be the loudest voice of all. 3 days after the dinner, I heard a knock at my door. Not the sharp, confident knock of a deliveryman or the impatient rhythm of someone who felt entitled to entry. This knock was hesitant, uneven, almost apologetic. I knew before I opened the door who it was. Mark stood there in a pressed suit as if armor could still shield him. But his shoulders slumped, his eyes carried none of their usual shine. He looked smaller somehow, though he was still taller than me. He cleared his throat, struggling with words. I came to talk, he said. I stepped aside, gesturing him in. He walked into my modest living room, his gaze flicking to the family photos on the wall. Pictures of Mother, of my soldiers' reunions, of landscapes I had captured on hikes. No framed medals, no signs of what Rivera had revealed, just the simple life I had chosen. He sat on the couch, hands clasped tightly, staring at the floor. Grace, I owe you an apology. His voice cracked on the word. I've said things, cruel things. I thought I was being funny, or maybe I thought I was pushing you to do more. But I didn't know, I didn't understand. I watched him for a long moment, weighing my words. His apology was genuine but fragile, like glass that might shatter with the wrong response. You don't need to apologize to me, I said softly. What you need is to learn respect, not just for me, but for everything you don't understand. There are battles people fight that you will never see. That doesn't make them less real, it makes them sacred. He lifted his head, his eyes wet. I feel like I've failed you as a brother. I shook my head. This isn't about failure, it's about choice. You chose to measure worth by money and noise. I chose silence. Neither erased the other, but respect has to live between them or family crumbles. Mark exhaled, shoulders sagging further. For the first time, he looked stripped of his arrogance. I want to do better. I want to make it right. I did not answer. Some things could not be made right in a single conversation, but I felt the sincerity in him, raw and unfamiliar. That was enough for now. When he left, Mother came by. She carried a pie, her hands trembling as she set it on the table. She sat across from me, eyes red-rimmed, and reached for my hand. I have been blind. As she whispered, all these years, I thought I was treating you both equally, but I wasn't. I praised him because he was loud, because his accomplishments were easy to see. I overlooked you because you were quiet, because you carried things I didn't ask about. I should have asked. I should have known. Her tears slid down her cheeks. I squeezed her hand gently. You loved me, Mom. That was enough. No, she said firmly, surprising me. It wasn't enough. Love without recognition becomes neglect. I will not neglect you anymore. Her words pierced deeper than I expected. I had never sought her recognition, but hearing it broke something open inside me, something I had locked away since my first deployment. That week, I returned to my work at the VA. Veterans filled the halls with stories both spoken and silent. I guided a young woman through her paperwork, a former medic who trembled when she spoke of the children she could not save. I sat with an older man who had served in Vietnam, who carried his grief like an old wound that never healed. Their burdens mirrored mine. In helping them, I found a way to carry my own. I did not need headlines or medals on display. My battlefield had shifted, but the mission remained: to honor, to serve, to heal. What I did not expect was Mark's next step. One evening, he called me, his voice subdued. Grace, I've been thinking. You work with those veterans every day. I want to help. I don't know how. But I want to. I paused, wary, but curiosity outweighed doubt. There are foundations that raise money for programs. They always need support. A week later, he joined me at a fundraising event for a veterans housing project. He wrote a check larger than I had imagined he would, but more than that, he stayed. He listened to the stories of men and women who had returned broken and tried to rebuild. He asked questions without arrogance, nodded with genuine respect. For the first time, I saw him humbled not by shame, but by empathy. Watching him, I realized that Rivera's words had not only silenced him, they had planted a seed, and perhaps in time that seed would grow. Mark did not change overnight. Transformation is never as clean as stories want it to be. At first, he gave money, writing checks that eased his conscience more than they changed his soul. But little by little, something shifted. He began attending more events with me, standing in corners at first, uncomfortable in rooms where people spoke of sacrifice and scars he had never known. But instead of leaving early, he stayed. He listened. He asked questions of the veterans. Not in the tone of a businessman closing a deal, but with the curiosity of a man trying to understand a language he had never learned. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone with a Marine who had lost both legs. The Marine was describing the slow climb of learning to walk again on prosthetics. Mark's brow furrowed as he listened, nodding, his eyes soft. Later, he told me quietly, I never knew how much people carry after war ends. I never wanted to know. But now I can't stop thinking about it. I watched him carefully. That's the beginning, Mark. Not knowing is ignorance. Wanting to know is the first step toward change. Weeks passed. He organized a charity golf tournament, something that came naturally to him, but this time he did not put his name in lights. He dedicated the proceeds to the Veterans Housing Project. When the organizers offered to feature him in the press release, he declined. This isn't about me. He said simply. It startled me to hear him speak those words, the same brother who once thrived only when the spotlight found him. Mother saw the change too. She spoke of it with wonder, telling me one evening, your brother looks at you differently now, softer, respectful, as if he's seeing you for the first time. I smiled faintly. Maybe he's seeing more than me. Maybe he's seeing the people I've always carried. In the quiet of my own life, I continued my work at the VA. I sat with veterans who needed someone to remind them they were not alone. I filled out forms, made phone calls, listened to stories. I found that my silence was not empty. It was space for others to speak. That became my mission now, to be the ear, the steady hand, the presence that said, you are seen. but the ghosts remained. They always would. Some nights I dreamed of Mosul, of the explosion that took Daniels. Some nights I heard Jameson's voice calling out on that ridge in Kunar. They were part of me, woven into my bones. I could not banish them, but I could honor them. And so one morning I drove to Arlington. The air was crisp, the sky a clear autumn blue. Rows of white headstones stretched before me, endless, precise, each one carrying a name, a story, a life cut short. I walked slowly, my boots crunching on the gravel, until I reached the section where some of my own had been laid to rest. I knelt before the stone marked with Daniel's name. My fingers traced the letters, rough against smooth marble. I made it home, I whispered. I kept going, and I'll keep carrying you. I moved to Jameson's grave, then to Hernandez, then to others whose faces still lived sharp in my memory. At each one I spoke softly, not of glory or medals, but of the small details that made them human. The candy in Daniel's pocket, the songs Hernandez hummed, the pride in Jameson's eyes when he showed me a photo of his newborn. As I stood there, the wind stirred through the trees, rustling leaves that scattered like whispers. For a moment I felt as if they were answering, reminding me that silence can still carry voices. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. I thought of Rivera's words, of humility as the highest honor. I thought of Mark's faltering apology, of my mother's tears, of the slow shifting of a family that had once been blind. I thought of the veterans I now served, their struggles, their resilience. When I opened my eyes, I felt steady. I was not a hero in the way stories demanded. I did not need statues or speeches. My worth was written here, in the names on these stones, in the lives that had brushed against mine. As I left Arlington, I looked back once more at the sea of white markers standing silent against the sky. They did not need applause, they needed remembrance. And I promised them this: as long as I breathed, I would carry their names. That was enough. I have come to believe that not every hero needs a metal pinned to their chest. Some victories are carved quietly into the heart. Some oaths are carried in silence, spoken only in the choices we make long after the battlefield is gone. And sometimes silence itself becomes the most powerful testimony of courage. For years, I thought my worth depended on proving something to the world, or worse, to my family. I thought if I could just hold my head high while Mark belittled me, I might earn respect, but respect was never about noise. It was never about shouting your accomplishments until the room fell quiet. True respect is born of humility, of living each day with a quiet devotion to something larger than yourself. I carry memories that will never leave me, names etched into the stone of Arlington and into the marrow of my bones. Their stories will not be written in textbooks. Their faces will not appear on monuments. But they live on when I whisper their names, when I stand steady for others who are still fighting unseen wars. That is the gift they gave me and the responsibility I carry. My brother learned something too. He learned that arrogance crumbles in the face of truth, and that empathy is not weakness but strength. Watching him change reminded me that redemption is possible, even in families fractured by pride. It is never too late to learn respect. Never too late to honor the battles you did not fight but can still acknowledge. To those listening now, perhaps carrying your own quiet wars, know this: your story matters, even if it is never shouted across a table or printed in the paper. You are not defined by the applause you receive, but by the truth you carry and the lives you touch in silence. If this story has touched you, I ask you to like, subscribe, and share it, not for me, but for the silent warriors whose sacrifices too often go unnoticed. Every view, every comment is another way to honor the women and men who gave their youth, their health, their very lives in service. Especially the women who stood in the shadows, who fought battles abroad and came home to fight new ones within their own families. May we remember them, may we speak their names. And may we learn that sometimes the greatest courage is found not in what we say, but in the silence we keep, steady and unbroken.